The time to start prepping for the 2025 offseason is right now. And if the Dolphins have a GM opening at the end of the season, and I think they should, how good of an opening would it be relative to the opportunities across the league? We're looking at the pros and cons of the Dolphins' current state of affairs for a potential GM search here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. Want to give a special shout out and thank you to our everydayers because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. It's time to shift our attention a little bit. We do have the rest of the regular season left to play, 3 games. And those 3 games, I think there's a lot of goodwill at stake for members of the Miami Dolphins. But I think one thing that as I look at the regression that we've seen from this team this year, and as the process has been allowed to play itself out year over year, and the team's strategy has unfolded, and we've gathered more information and got more results and seen the shortcomings that have handcuffed this team this season in particular, after X amount of time, I find myself firmly in the camp that I believe the Dolphins need new input on the direction of a team at a minimum. But that new input for me, and my personal opinion, would be if I were in the shoes of Stephen Ross, I would be undertaking a general manager hiring search at the end of the season because I would want new feedback from somebody who's been a part of different organizations with different learned experiences and maybe has a different process of collaborating than what the Dolphins have gotten from Chris Grier. And I know some of the shortcomings that exist with this team that the team has to try to play around and through and problem solve. They're not necessarily Chris Grier's ideas, right? The offensive line devaluation, particularly at guard, is a Shanahan scheme staple principle. But at some point, you as the general manager, as the person who rubber stamps all of the talent acquisition, and if you're collaborating with the head coach, there's an opportunity to push back and say, well, you know what? I think we also need this, or this probably needs to happen. And it felt like that was not done coming into this year at too many spots. And I understand it's a finite resource league, and you could go back as recently as last offseason. I was a fan of a lot of the things that Chris Grier did. But I think the punches that have rolled up for you this season, you're playing a must-win game against the Houston Texans in Week 15, and Teron Armstead is unable to go with knee soreness. And, that was a part of the thing when you signed up for Teron Armstead. And Kendall Lamb, the backup offensive tackle, the swing tackle, can't go with a back injury. And Austin Jackson's out for the year. And Patrick Paul, you used a second-round pick on Patrick Paul. He can only play one tackle spot at a time. And Keon Smith went down in the preseason, and you can't really control that. And he's not a player with an older player with an injury history. But your essential pieces at that tackle spot, all of them failed you by December 15th to be ready to play a football game. And that's how you end up playing with Jackson Carman at right tackle. The backup quarterback position, and a lot of trust and belief and faith and time in the system. And what did that get you when there were opportunities to play this year? Catastrophically bad plays. So I do believe this is the juncture that I am putting my flag in the ground with this portion of what I think needs to change for the team. I think there's opportunities. And I'm going to give some names at the end. They're not all of the names that I have down. I don't want to do all of that deep dive stuff until we know for sure we're going to have an opening. But I think proactively looking at where the Dolphins at this point in time, what are the good dynamics and the bad dynamics about a potential vacancy at general manager. And then introducing some early names, including there's at least one popular name that you will probably recognize if you keep tabs of general manager searches across the league. So let's get into it. What are some of the pros of Miami's situation as it pertains to a front office executive that you would potentially be looking to hire to step in with where the Dolphins are at their current point in time? The number one thing that I will always give Stephen Ross credit for is he's never afraid to invest in his franchise. There are always opportunities. There's always cash liquidity. And they just agreed to a sale for private equity to buy minority ownership stakes in the team that's going to infuse more cash liquidity into the operations, theoretically, of the Miami Dolphins franchise. And that means whether that's facilities. The team finished number one as far in the NFL Players Association poll, as far as organizationally, like what resources are available to them. Whether that's contract restructuring and fielding a competitive team by not being afraid to sign checks. That can be a good thing and a bad thing. But every year, based on how you structure your contracts, if you're willing to write the checks to restructure, it allows you to operate at a certain debt or cash to cap ratio that will keep you, or should theoretically keep you, in the window in which any given team is going to try to be competing in any given point in time. That is the number one thing that I think, there's owners across the league. Cincinnati, notorious for not operating at a cash to cap deficit. Whatever they pay within a year are, generally speaking, for the salaries of the players, and that's it. There's not a lot of restructuring there. There's not a lot of prorating out strategically to spend above an average level or even at an average level. There's hardball with players like Jamar Chase, who it's probably going to cost them across the life of that new contract $25 million per season. Is upwards. Like, people are thinking that Jamar Chase might get $40 million this year. If they'd have aggressively set the market, that could have been 34. So there's owners across the league that aren't willing to do that. And I don't take that for granted with what the Dolphins have with Stephen Ross. I think the other thing with Stephen Ross, and this has been a change from when he first or purchased the team, I should say. There was a lot of impulsiveness early with Stephen Ross. And I think as time has passed for Stephen Ross as an NFL owner, I think he's learned a lot of hard lessons. But I think, generally speaking, he is patient at times, I think, to a fault as an owner. So as you are coming in as an executive, you're going to have the most fresh timeline in which to impress your vision of a football team. You're going to have the time to impress your vision of a football team onto the roster, because this is not an owner that acts haphazardly or will fire a general manager after a short window. I know a lot of Dolphins fans have been ready to move on for Chris Grier for an extended period of time. And I think this is probably the first juncture where I would agree that this has run its course, and you came up empty in your peak competitive window within this life cycle as a team. And as you get ready for the next life cycle to be competitive, as you try to compete through transition with, that unfortunately means that I would prefer somebody else to be making the decision, so that the peak is higher than what we saw it be with the Dolphins that had some missed opportunities over the course of the past 2-3 years. I think the other thing that stands out is a lot of the work, heavy lifting, not all of it, and we'll get into some of it when we get to the cons of this position, but a lot of the heavy lifting work that I think needs to be done with this roster is non-premium positions, guards, safeties, the tight end position, off-ball linebacker aside of Jordan Brooks, aside of tight end, aside of Jonnu Smith. Those are not positions that are always in the utmost of demand. So I think many, not all, but many of the most pressing issues for the Dolphins as a team, as a roster that you're looking to kickstart and get this thing in gear, are positions that aren't going to be tapped out early in free agency, early in a draft window. I have a few more thoughts on some things that I think are attractive about this position, and then a number of things that I think are questions about this position that may potentially be barriers to you hiring the best possible candidate that you can set your eyes to. We'll get into all that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. If you're trying to get down to the stadium on Sunday, the Dolphins are hosting the San Francisco 49ers, a big Kyle Shanahan versus Mike McDaniel rematch. If you're trying to get down to the Rock, get your tickets through Game Time. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have all-in pricing that you can toggle on, so there's no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart. You can see a panoramic view from your section, so you know exactly what sightlines you're getting before you commit to tickets. And with just a few taps on your phone, you can get the tickets delivered directly to your phone. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. You can take advantage of all of the NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page as where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. As things currently stand, the Dolphins are favored this weekend against the 49ers in the 4 o'clock window by 1.5. San Francisco obviously coming off of a tough loss of their own. They are also 6-8, and they do have a little bit of extra rest to help offset the West Coast travel. I think this game being played at 4:25 also helps San Francisco. But how both of these teams respond to losses is the big wild card. So if you like the Dolphins -1.5, or if you like the 49ers outright, you can get them on the money line for +104. So never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The other things I have in my notes for attractive elements of this position for the Dolphins. There are exit opportunities that exist with some of your more questionable long-term contracts that exist. Teron Armstead, will he play this year upcoming in 2025? Will he not? He's close to playing the most snaps he's played in a season since 2020. But of course, that he didn't last more than a couple of reps into the first game against the Jets this season 2 weeks ago. So when we see Teron Armstead with that being necessitated as a rest will be fascinating. If this is the end of the road for Teron, I'm sure that's not the way that he would want to go out. So we may see him again. But if he chooses to retire, you can rewrite that contract. So you'd save, I think it's $13 million in cap space between now and when you process the retirement. So you could process this as a post-June 1st and split it between 2025 and 2026 if you wanted to, or you could take the whole thing up front and save like $3.5 million. Bradley Chubb, there's a post-June 1st separation opportunity on that contract, and he obviously has not played this season. He's in his activation window right now. Will they use it for Bradley Chubb? I don't know. But you could move on post-June 1st and save $20 million in cap space in 2025. You can't access that cap space until you get into post-June 1st, but there's very easy pathways for restructure potential for the Dolphins where you can restructure Zach Sealer, Austin Jackson, Jordan Brooks, Aaron Brewer, and then if Teron Armstead retires, you could restructure those 4 names and Teron Armstead process that retirement. So that doesn't include Bradley Chubb. That doesn't include anything with the Tua Tagovailoa contract for restructure. That doesn't include anything with Tyreek Hill if you choose to try to move on from Tyreek Hill. And you're still sitting at $40 million in cap space. And that would all be accessible in March as compared to this past year when you opened the league calendar year in March, you were kind of handcuffed sitting at 18, 20. Like, do we even have enough to franchise tag Christian Wilkins? No. So you're going to have significantly more flexibility, and there's a lot more moves that you can make to create a lot more cap space if you wanted to. But I want to just take some low-hanging fruit and say, look, I think we all agree these are players that have proven their worth and are younger players that are going to be here for the foreseeable future. You restructure these basic 4 or 5 guys, you're going to have twice as much operating cap to open the year as what you did last year. And then I do think you have a good core of talent. Certainly not to the degree of when the last time you made a change at the general manager or the top of the football operations period. That was in 2019 when you reassigned Mike Tannenbaum and Chris Greer became the unquestioned head of football operations. You had to strip a lot of things down, and a lot's been made about the rebuild and how dramatic that was. I do think you needed to take those steps back in order to step forward no matter what. And that included getting rid of your leading passer, your leading rusher. I think your 2 leading receivers, your best offensive lineman, your leading sack player from the previous year, your leading tackler from the past year. Like, it was everything. You had so many older contracts, and they have contracts now that are not ideal that you'd move on from. And that's part of the list of what we'll get into the cons of the opening. But at the very least, you have a nucleus of some young talent that's been collected. Now, you didn't hit at the rate that you needed to be the team that you envisioned that you were going to be when you started that process in 2019, but you have answers at a number of spots. It's not ground up type approach. So I think those are the things that, plus potential for 2 compensatory 3s, which would give you 4 picks in the top 100 in your first year cycle if you did indeed make a change. But the cons. I think the cons for this position, the one you start with as a general manager and executive, is I think it's unlikely you would have your choice in year 1 of either head coach or quarterback. That could also be a pro, given what we just talked about with the patience of the owner to let the process play itself out. So if your objective when you come in and are hired, it might not be super appealing to say, hey, I got a quarterback that's on a close to top of market contract. I got a head coach that's not the guy that I picked that I have to try to choose to work with. I think you can also throw in some of the other power players with the power structure in Miami. I know Brandon Shore does a lot of contract work, and that's another party to collaborate with if you're an executive coming in. How hands-on is Tom Garfinkel with the football operations? I don't know that, but I know he's such a prominent figure in the organization. So for a team that's put the emphasis on collaboration, I think many executives kind of have traditionally viewed this role as you sit at the top of the pyramid and you call all the shots and you have people that report to you to coordinate how the team is run. I don't think the current power structure in Miami is set up that way. And that includes with the head coach. I'd be surprised if Mike McDaniel were dismissed this year. And I could see paths forward with Mike McDaniel that require philosophical changes, that require different approaches, that require honest conversations about the lessons you learned this year. And if you're willing to let him grow through that and give him an opportunity next year with, I think, new input from somebody with a different background to be the person that he is using as a sounding board instead of Chris has felt very passive. And I think it's admirable, but it's also a detriment when the issues, the things that you kind of didn't think would be problems for you, they end up being really big problems. And enough of those things happen. If you're passive about it as the guy who is ultimately responsible for putting your name on all the things that have been done, that's really hard to overcome when it's time for a performance assessment of the job that you've done. And that's why I think we're in these shoes that we are in right now. Now, I do think the need to rebuild a number of important positions on the team exists in the immediate sense. That's the edge rush room and the cornerback room. You'll need a tackle, right? If Teron Armstead goes and it's Patrick Paul and it's Austin Jackson, you'll need another tackle. But I don't think you have to completely turn that room on its head the way that you, I think, have to with the pass rush room. We have Chop Robinson. You have Jalen Phillips coming off another season-ending injury in a contract year, no less. And Bradley Chubb, who you're potentially looking at exit avenues on that strategy. It's the top 3 investments in the pass rush room. And cornerback Jalen Ramsey, is his future at safety? Is his future at nickel? If that's the case, what do you have at outside corner outside of Kendall Fuller next year and a return year for the second year of a 2-year contract? Cam Smith, what can you trust from Cam Smith? Storm Duck, I know they like Storm Duck. Is it responsible to trust him completely with the starting job this offseason? I don't think so. So those spots are premium positions and I think are going to require a lot of attention. And then you have the prospect of potentially parting ways with a number of high performers on the roster due to age and cost that I think will create a bit of a moving target, especially if you're not able to choose your head coach and you come in and you're paired with Mike McDaniel, who would presumably be in a hot seat, prove it type of year. There's a lot of pressure to perform. Now, again, with Stephen Ross and the patience he illustrated with this build, I think that is in favor of the general manager himself to try to make it work. And then if it doesn't, you're going to get the good graces to put your impression on the team and you'll be afforded the time to do it. And I think that's a pro to the job. But do you move on from Tyreek Hill this offseason and sell for what you can while he has 1 year of guaranteed salary left, reflecting on what Stephon Diggs got traded for? I think that's probably the compensation package I would kind of look for Tyreek. If you were to move on, that's a whole other podcast for a whole other time. But obviously we mentioned Bradley Chubb and Teron Armstead as the other prominent names that have been impact players here when they've been available, but their age and cost as you get ready for optimizing the next life cycle and operate competitive window while you try to contend through the transition is going to make a moving target for how successful you may or may not be able to be in year one. I have 3 names that I like. I have more names than that down that I've been doing research on, but I have 3 names that I like. I'm going to give all 3 of those to you here next on Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. So that time of year, the college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all of the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into the first matchup between the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. And then at 4, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to give you 3 names and kind of I won't say elevator pitch, but like the why I like them, or the quick and dirty of why I like them as options. The first name is probably going to be the most buzzy GM candidate of the cycle, and that's Ray Agnew of the Detroit Lions. And here's why I like Ray Agnew in Detroit. He's obviously been with Brad Holmes since 2021 with this build of Detroit. But before that, he was under Les Snead from 2017 to 2020. Obviously, Les Snead, wheeler and dealer, aggressive, very good talent production and development in that program with Sean McVay and with Les Snead at the top of the totem pole there. They've done an awesome job with collecting older talent like you saw in Miami and then transitioning away from it and competing through the transitional window, where the last 2 years they've had a lot of young players, and they made the playoffs last year, and they're in first place right now, despite starting the season 1-4 with a bunch of injuries. So that kind of lineage paired with the Detroit from the ground up build an organization type of lineage, those are two really impressive processes to have been a part of. And the Detroit organization, what I really like, they've shown a willingness to embrace and draft players based off of talent, not off of value, positional value. There's a short-term shelf life for a lot of your players as quote-unquote assets in the team building effort. A lot of 2-year deals, a lot of 1-year deals in free agency. Most players in their prime, if they're not going to get super contracts with optimum guaranteed money, most of them are looking for 3-year deals with 1 or 2 years guaranteed because they want to get back in and get another contract before their prime runs out. So just take good players. Just draft good talent. Don't say, oh, we need to do this or get this tackle or corner and this, but we need to draft a corner here because it's a premium position as compared to if there's a safety or a guard or a tight end or a linebacker that's staring you right in the face. That's embodied by names like Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta and Brian Branch, who have been central pieces of what Detroit has become. The next name I have is Andy Weidl. He's assistant GM in Pittsburgh under Omar Khan. His lineage is really impressive. He was in Baltimore under Ozzie Newsome for like a decade. And then he was hired as Philadelphia's VP of player personnel under Howie Roseman and was there for an extended period of time before being hired as the assistant general manager when Omar Khan took the GM job in Pittsburgh from Kevin Colbert. So Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Baltimore is a hell of a 1-2-3 punch of places you've been, places you've operated in important roles, and obviously being mentored by Ozzie Newsome and Howie Roseman in the art of running a franchise is as good as you could hope for. He's got a sterling scouting reputation and covets tough, smart, thick-skinned, mentally strong players, and also embraces the BPA mentality in the draft because positions that look strong can very quickly become needs for your football team. So Andy Weidl, who might be my favorite. The challenge with Andy is he's a Western PA native and is the assistant GM in Pittsburgh. So how much of a rush is he to leave home to take a job and run a team? I don't know. And the last name that I have is a name that always turns up in these GM candidates conversations every offseason or every end of season. And it's Will McClay, who is the VP of player personnel for the Dallas Cowboys. They've had some outstanding draft and develop successes during his time. He's been in a decision-making role and an executive role in Dallas for about a decade now. He's considered to be the decider on draft matters, despite not having the general manager title. That is Jerry Jones's title. The question is, and teams have interviewed him. Teams have tried to move on from him. The question is, at what point does Will McClay get an offer that's too good to refuse? Or at what point does Will McClay decide he wants to spread his wings and get out from underneath Jerry Jones? And maybe the agreement is in place there that when Jerry is no longer the owner of the team and Steven, his son, is the owner of the team, maybe Will get the GM job or GM title at that point. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the dynamics are there. But that's a name that's always involved in interviews. And I really admire the way Dallas, and I know they didn't have a good offseason this past offseason, but a lot of that had to do with Jerry Jones and the negotiation tactics for Dak Prescott and his contract because of his cap hit, because of the way they've handled his contract in the past with the 2 franchise tags, and then they get the contract agreement done, and he's got a no tag clause, he's got no trade clause, and he had all this money backed up. This was going to be a contract year for Dak. They couldn't do anything because it took him forever to ultimately give him $60 million a season anyway, APY. So like Dak got everything he was asking for anyway, and instead of doing it in March, they gave it to him in August. And it gridlocked their entire ability to conduct a competitive offseason in free agency. They lost a ton of players, and they couldn't put them back in the pipe. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So those are probably my 3 favorite names that I have right now. I have other ones. We'll do deep dives if and when we get to the point where we know we have a vacancy for sure. We obviously still have 3 games left to play. But I thought now was a good time to kind of start to dip our toe as we're in between games, because I did the Tony Sperano thing. I got the shovel. I got the tape from the Houston game. I went out in the backyard. I buried that damn thing, and we're going to leave it behind. I'm obviously doing the grading for Touchdown Miami, but we're not going to harp on that football game. That was not a very fun game to watch for a lot of obvious reasons. Nobody played well. And I know y'all are angry about it because y'all are yelling at me for not being tough on the right people, or being too tough on the wrong person, or not calling for everybody to be fired, or not getting my hair cut, or like whatever you guys are yelling at me for, which seems like has been the past 48 hours of YouTube comments and social media comments. Nobody played well. Nobody played well. So we're going to leave it behind. And I hope this was enough to wet your whistle with some other conversations that need to start being had around this football team. That's going to do it for us here today on the show, Kyle Krabs. I hope you guys keep it locked in here on the Locked On Dolphins podcast. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. I'll talk to you all again tomorrow.